I never imagined my wife would betray me, especially not with the man hired to take care of me. But I saw it in her eyes long before the truth came out. The longing. The hunger. The way she came alive when he was near. I ignored it at first, convincing myself I was paranoid. But my son saw it too. And when he finally caught them, there was no denying it anymore. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for years, had fallen into another man's arms, right under our roof. Before I dive into my story, I just want to appreciate all my subscribers for supporting this channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on more inspiring and dramatic stories like this one. Your support helps bring these stories to life. Now, let's get into it. It's strange how life changes when you least expect it. One moment you have everything: a loving wife, children who adore you, a home filled with laughter. The next, you're trapped in a body that no longer works the way it used to, forced to watch the world move on without you. That was my reality after the accident. I was Michael Adams, a man who once prided himself on being strong, capable, and in control. A single moment on a slippery road took all of that away. One crash. 1 second. And suddenly, I was a man confined to a wheelchair, dependent on others for the simplest things. At first, Rebecca, my wife, was my rock. She took care of everything: me, the kids, the house. She carried a weight no woman should have to bear alone. I saw it in her eyes, the exhaustion, the loneliness. But I was too broken to do anything about it. I thought love would be enough to keep us strong. I was wrong. When Rebecca first suggested hiring a caretaker, I resisted. I didn't want a stranger in my home, seeing me at my weakest. But I had no choice. My condition had made things difficult, and Rebecca was stretched too thin. That's how Daniel Carter came into our lives. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with a confidence that made people gravitate toward him. He was good at what he did, no doubt about that. He made things easier for me, getting me in and out of my chair, helping with therapy, handling the things Rebecca no longer had time for. But he also made things easier for her. I should have noticed it earlier. The way she laughed more when he was around. The way her tired eyes lit up when he spoke. The way she started caring about things she had stopped bothering with: her hair, her clothes, the soft touch of makeup on her face. I told myself I was imagining things. That she was just happy to have help, to have some weight lifted off her shoulders. But deep down, I knew something had changed. It wasn't just me who noticed. My son, Ethan, saw it too. Ethan was 17, smart and observant. Too observant, maybe. He had always been protective of his mother, always watching out for her in ways I couldn't. One evening, as Daniel helped me back into my chair after a session in the living room, I saw Ethan standing in the hallway, watching. His gaze wasn't on me, though. It was on his mother. Or more specifically, on the way Daniel looked at her. I followed his eyes and saw it for the first time, Daniel's stare lingering on Rebecca, his admiration barely hidden. And worse, the way she avoided meeting his gaze, as if afraid of what it might reveal. Ethan caught my eye and quickly looked away, but something had shifted. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened, the way his shoulders squared. He had seen something. And I had a feeling he wasn't going to ignore it. It started with small things. Rebecca began dressing differently, nothing too obvious at first, just little changes. A new perfume, a touch of lipstick when she never used to bother. Then came the moments when she seemed distracted. She'd be in the kitchen, lost in thought, not hearing me call her name. Or she'd be on her phone, quickly tucking it away when I entered the room. Daniel, for his part, never crossed any obvious lines. Not yet. But he didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to stir something in Rebecca that had been dormant for years. I wanted to believe it was all in my head. That my wife was still the woman I had married. That she would never betray me. But denial can only last so long. And as I watched my son narrow his eyes every time Daniel was around, I knew one thing for sure: if something was happening, Ethan would find out. And when he did, nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan wasn't the type to speak his thoughts immediately. He watched, observed, and pieced things together in his mind before acting. That's what made me uneasy. If my son was suspicious, it meant there was something to be suspicious about. Rebecca, on the other hand, seemed completely unaware, or maybe she didn't want to be aware, of how noticeable her behavior had become. It started subtly, like a game between them, hidden in gestures and glances. "Your hair looks nice today, Rebecca," Daniel said one afternoon as he helped me onto the couch. Rebecca smiled, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. "Oh, thanks. I barely did anything to it." "You don't need to," he said smoothly. "Some women need effort to look beautiful. You're not one of them." I felt something tighten in my chest. A compliment. A harmless one, maybe. But it was the way he said it, the way his voice dipped slightly, the way his eyes held onto hers for just a second too long. Rebecca looked away quickly, but I caught the small smile playing at her lips. A part of her liked it. Ethan, who had been in the kitchen, clenching his jaw as he washed a plate, suddenly dropped it into the sink with a sharp clang. Rebecca jumped. "Ethan! Be careful!" Ethan barely glanced at her before drying his hands and walking past us. But as he did, his eyes flicked to Daniel, cold and unreadable. Daniel only smirked. My son wasn't just watching anymore. He was waiting. I wasn't an idiot. I knew what was happening. Rebecca had been without intimacy for years. Our marriage had turned into a partnership, a friendship, but not a romance. I could no longer be the man I once was for her. I saw the loneliness in her eyes every night as she climbed into bed beside me, her body untouched, her heart yearning for something I couldn't give. And Daniel? He made things worse. He gave her what I couldn't: attention, compliments, admiration. The way a man looks at a woman when he wants her. She tried to resist it, I could tell. But the more he pushed, the weaker she became. As I saw it in the way her breathing changed when he was close. The way her hands fidgeted when he walked beside her, or when he lightly placed a hand on her back in a polite, guiding gesture as they moved through a doorway. And Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. One night, Ethan knocked on my bedroom door after Rebecca had gone to put Lily to bed. "Dad," he said quietly, stepping inside. "I need to ask you something." I nodded for him to continue. He hesitated, then met my gaze. "Do you trust Mom?" The question punched me harder than I expected. I swallowed. "Of course I do." He studied me, his expression unreadable. "Then you need to open your eyes." I stared at him, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with a truth I wasn't ready to face. The moment I should have known for certain came a week later. It was late. Rebecca had gone downstairs for something, and I, unable to sleep, wheeled myself to the edge of the hallway to get some water. That's when I heard them. Low voices. Whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Daniel's voice, deep and smooth. Rebecca's softer, almost nervous. I gripped the wheels of my chair and slowly moved closer. "We shouldn't," she was saying. "This is wrong. But you feel it, don't you?" Daniel's voice was husky. "Tell me you don't." Silence. Then, a shaky breath. "Daniel!" I heard the sound of movement, the shuffle of feet. My chest tightened. Were they touching? I pushed forward. The moment my chair creaked against the wooden floor, Rebecca gasped and quickly stepped away. Daniel turned, his face unreadable, but Rebecca's eyes were wide with guilt. "Michael!" she breathed, pressing a hand to her chest. "You scared me." I looked between them, my pulse pounding. "What's going on?" Rebecca opened her mouth, but Daniel spoke first. "Nothing, Michael. We were just talking." His voice was calm, controlled. Too controlled. Rebecca nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Just talking." I knew that was a lie. And from the way Ethan stood at the top of the stairs, watching from the shadows, I knew he had seen enough to confirm what he had feared all along. Something was happening between them, and it was only a matter of time before they crossed the line. Some betrayals happen in a single moment. Others build slowly, step by step, choice by choice, until there's no turning back. Rebecca's betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was a slow-burning fire, one that started with innocent embers, harmless conversations, fleeting glances, unspoken thoughts. But fire, once fed, grows. And before she knew it, before I knew it, she had already stepped too close to the flames. It happened on a quiet afternoon. Ethan was out with his friends, and Lily was napping upstairs. Daniel had stayed late, helping with some things around the house. I was in the living room, dozing off in my chair, my body weighed down by fatigue. I didn't mean to fall asleep, but I did. And when I woke up, everything had changed. I heard them before I saw them. The hushed voices, the nervous laughter coming from the kitchen. My heart pounded as I slowly wheeled myself forward, careful not to make a sound. And then I saw them. Rebecca stood by the kitchen counter, her back pressed against it. Daniel was close, too close. His hand wasn't on her, but it didn't need to be. The way he looked at her, the way she looked back at him, was enough. "I can't do this," she whispered, shaking her head. But her voice lacked conviction. Daniel didn't move away. "You are doing this, Rebecca. We both are." She closed her eyes, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Michael! He's asleep," Daniel murmured. Silence. I gripped the wheels of my chair, my breath caught in my throat. "Don't do it, Rebecca. Please don't do it. I don't want to stop." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a soft, hesitant kiss. It was deep, desperate, like they had been holding back for too long. And Rebecca? She kissed him back just as hungrily. My world stopped. I wanted to yell, to scream, to do something, but I was frozen, trapped in my own useless body, forced to watch as my wife, the woman who had once promised to love me forever, let another man take her. A sound from the hallway made me snap out of my daze. I turned my head just in time to see Ethan standing there, his face pale, his fists clenched. He had seen it too. His mother. Kissing another man. For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick with shock, guilt, and something else, something dangerous brewing in my son's eyes. Rebecca gasped when she saw him, shoving Daniel away like she had just woken up from a spell. "Ethan!" But Ethan was already turning, storming away before she could finish. She ran after him, calling his name, but he was gone. And I just sat there, feeling my heart break in ways I never thought possible. Because I knew one thing for certain. Betrayal is like a crack in glass. At first, it's just a single fracture, small, almost invisible. But with time, pressure, and the weight of truth, it spreads, shattering everything in its path. After that afternoon in the kitchen, nothing in our house was the same. Ethan didn't speak to his mother. He barely looked at her. At dinner, he sat stiffly in his chair, eating in silence, his jaw tight, his fists clenched beneath the table. Rebecca, on the other hand, was falling apart. She tried to act normal, but I could see the guilt eating her alive. She burned food, forgot things, jumped whenever Ethan entered the room, as if expecting him to lash out at any moment. And Daniel? He carried himself as if nothing had happened. That was the worst part. He smirked when Rebecca avoided his gaze, looked amused when Ethan's cold stare followed him around the house. He knew what he had done, and he didn't care. But Ethan did. And he wasn't going to let it go. One night, after Rebecca had gone to bed, Ethan came to me in the living room. His face was unreadable, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. "You saw, didn't you?" His voice was low, steady. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yes." A muscle in his jaw twitched. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "I'm not letting him get away with this," he said. The quiet fury in his voice sent a chill down my spine. "Ethan. She's our mother, Dad." His voice cracked slightly, but his anger held strong. And she's cheating on you. With him. He spat the last word like it was poison. I closed my eyes. I know. His fists clenched. And you're just gonna sit here and do nothing? I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the boy who had grown into a man too soon because of what he had witnessed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have an answer for him. Because the truth was, I didn't know what to do. It all came crashing down the next day. Daniel was in the backyard, fixing something near the tool shed. Rebecca was outside too, standing by the porch, watching him with an expression she thought no one could see. But Ethan saw. I saw. And Ethan had had enough. Without a word, he stormed outside. Rebecca turned just as he approached Daniel, her eyes widening. Ethan, wait! But Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed Daniel by the collar and shoved him back against the shed, his face inches from his. If you ever touch my mother again, I swear to God. Daniel smirked. Or what? That smirk was the last mistake he made. Ethan swung. His fist connected with Daniel's jaw so hard I heard the crack from where I sat inside. Daniel stumbled back, shocked. He hadn't expected Ethan to actually hit him. But Ethan wasn't finished. He grabbed Daniel again, shoving him down into the dirt. You think you're a man? Sneaking around with a married woman? His voice shook with fury. You're nothing. Rebecca was screaming now, trying to pull Ethan away, but he wouldn't let go. His whole body was shaking with rage, his breathing heavy. And for the first time, I saw Daniel afraid. Because Ethan wasn't just a kid anymore. He was a man protecting his family. That night, Rebecca locked herself in our bedroom and cried. I could hear the muffled sobs through the door, the weight of her choices crushing her all at once. But I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. Because no matter how much I had loved her, no matter how many years we had spent together, she had made a choice. And choices had consequences. Betrayal doesn't just destroy marriages, it destroys families. It leaves scars in places you never imagined, turning love into resentment, trust into suspicion, and home into just another house. After that night, nothing could be undone. Rebecca knew it. Ethan knew it. And I knew it too. The silence in the house was unbearable. Rebecca barely spoke, walking around like a ghost of herself. Ethan avoided her completely. He stayed out late, barely ate, barely slept. When he did speak, it was only to me, and even then, it was short, clipped sentences. Daniel was gone. He never came back after that day. No calls, no messages. Not even an apology. And Rebecca? She tried. At first, she tried to pretend like we could fix it. She begged Ethan to talk to her, pleaded with me to look at her the way I used to. But I couldn't. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. I saw her choosing him. No apology could erase that. One evening, Rebecca cornered Ethan in the kitchen. I heard them before I saw them, her broken voice, his cold silence. Ethan, please, she whispered. Say something. He stared at her for a long time. Then he said, You're not the person I thought you were. And he walked away. I had spent years believing that love could survive anything. That marriage, no matter how damaged, could always be repaired. But I was wrong. Some things can't be undone. So one night, as Rebecca sat across from me at the dinner table, I said the words that had been sitting on my tongue for weeks. I want a divorce. She didn't fight it. She didn't even cry. She just nodded, as if she had been waiting for it all along. Rebecca moved out a month later. Ethan stayed with me, refusing to go with her. Lily was too young to understand, but I knew one day she would. It's been years since that day. I don't know where Daniel is. I don't ask about Rebecca. But I do know this: betrayal is a wound that never fully heals. You just learn to live with the scar. And I have. Because in the end, I lost a wife. But I kept my son. And that was enough.